a conversation with Brett Walton of Circle of Blue about the water crisis and wildfire aftermath across the American West.
Hi, I'm Brett Walton. I'm a reporter for Circle of Blue. I live in Seattle and cover water issues nationally and internationally, but particularly focused on the American West. I've been traveling out west in the last few weeks. It's summer, it's hot and dry, so it's peak season for water and water-related problems out west. So I was in Las Vegas looking at Hoover Dam and Lake Mead and some of the hydropower issues they're having there. Hoover Dam generates a good bit of electricity for the Southwest, and as Lake Mead is declining, it is generating less and less power. There comes a point, if Lake Mead drops another 20 feet or so, that Hoover Dam's generating capacity will be cut another 30%. So one of the things I'm looking at is what are the effects of that on the power customers who buy the power from Hoover and for the power grid in general, because hydropower does some beneficial things for regional electric grids, allowing renewable energy to be incorporated, and it can ramp up and ramp down depending on peak demands. Hoover has been falling. Its power output is about half of what it was in the year 2000, which was the last time that Lake Mead was pretty much full. So when they don't get the hydropower, they go elsewhere, and a lot of times it's whatever's available on the market. That could be natural gas or fossil fueled power, or it could be renewables. So there's a lot of solar projects that are going up in the desert because solar is a pretty abundant resource. In the Western US, we're seeing a drying climate because of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Colorado River Basin for sure, but across the other watersheds, snowpack is on a downward trend and will be facing some pretty severe declines throughout this century. Colorado River Basin, the term people throw around is aridification. So it's not just we're in a drought, but we're in a long-term drying pattern. There's been a shift in the climate in the region. And you can see that from all of the data. And one of the particularly interesting things in the Colorado River Basin this year is that snowpack and precipitation does not correlate to runoff. So what I mean by that is there was a pretty average snowpack in March in the Colorado River Basin. This summer, the projected runoff into Lake Powell, one of the big reservoirs, is one of the lowest in the last couple decades. And that's because of a warmer climate has been sucking up that moisture before it gets to the rivers. The soils are quite dry from all of that heat, and the soils are taking some of the water. So even though there's been a decent snowpack, there's still a water supply emergency on the basin because of all these other things that are, for lack of a better word, stealing water before it gets to rivers and reservoirs. So that's the climate baseline. And then there's the policy level that overlays on that, where we can make good choices about where we build and how we build and what we build and how we manage our water, or we can make bad choices. So agriculture uses the most water pretty much everywhere. Cities use relatively little. So when we're looking for the biggest savings and the biggest way to make an impact on water conservation and water use, yes, cities are important, but agriculture is where the focus should be. And what we grow and how we grow it are the major contributors to water supply shortages and crises. There's the perception out there that cities, because people see cities and see fountains and all of the lawns and pools, they're the most visible, but it's the smaller part. So that's one of the misperceptions. So one of the things that disaster management experts like to say is that nature creates a hazard and man makes a disaster. We saw that in Texas recently with the flash floods and the camp that was located in a floodplain, even though they have been warned that this is a floodplain and at risk. When those rushing waters came by, that was a bad decision to build there and a bad decision to allow that camp to be built there. So that's the human error on top of a really tempestuous, raging climate, both from drought and from flood perspective. Another big thing I've been looking at is wildfire and some of the cascading impacts from wildfire and how they persist for years after the fire is put out. I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, and looking at some of the post-fire flooding effects in Flagstaff. they've been hit by just a rolling series of wildfires in the forests above Flagstaff in the last 15 years. And after those fires have been extinguished, the hydrology in the watershed has changed. Were channels where there were no channels before. The flows in the monsoon season were massive coming off of those slopes, and the downstream communities and roads were flooded and washed away. So Flagstaff has been kind of on the forefront of post-fire flooding, mitigation, and trying to work with the changed watershed and protect downstream assets like roads and homes and people's lives and property. So I went out on field tours of some of the irrigation infrastructure, of the slope and channel remediation that has been going on in Flagstaff with the engineers and the hydrologists who are working on these projects. And then talking to people who are affected by all of these changes. In Flagstaff, I was talking to homeowners who live downstream of these slopes who have been flooded or at risk of flooding. And then to see the projects that Coconino County and some of these other places have put in place to be able to protect the people from these hazards. And what was great in Flagstaff is to see that some of these projects are working. They had burn scar, monsoon rains, big floods, put the project in, and the year after that, the homes were dry and protected from rockfall and debris. So that's nice to see, is that something that comes together to protect against these hazards. I was also earlier this week out in central Washington looking at another aspect of post-fire recovery and post-fire hazard, and that was for irrigation systems. The canals that the irrigation systems use to draw water are often in national forests or along national forest lands or in forested lands. That was the case for this irrigation district in central Washington, where there was a fire last year that burned the slopes around its canal. Now the canal has been damaged by debris and rockfall, and there's sediment. So they need to replace their canal. It's this precipitous piece of infrastructure that is perched along cliffs and delivers water to high-value orchards and tree fruit in central Washington. So it's a very big deal that this canal be in good shape. And right now it's at risk of failure from all these hazards. Wildfires are such a comprehensive disaster, but I'm interested most in the post-fire period. So those years, months and years after the fire, where the watershed becomes the key player because the watershed has been transformed. So that's who I was talking with in these wildfire stories, are the people who are then affected by those radical changes in the watershed. And that is a whole host of players, from water utilities to irrigation districts to homeowners to city and county agencies, road agencies, departments of transportation. Flash floods in the Southwest are particularly challenging because they have monsoon rains, which can dump several inches over an hour. And when you get that amount of rain over a burn scar, you get massive floods. And that's where the impacts lie, from washed out roads to flooded homes to drinking water reservoirs that are filled with sediment. And those effects of post-fire persist for years and years and years. I would just say that water is the story in the West, and you can connect almost anything in the West to a water issue. And more of these stories are coming to the fore now because the hazards and the hazard levels are getting more intense, especially this time of year. Summer is the season of risk in the Northern Hemisphere, especially in the West, when you have monsoon rains and floods, plus forest fires, plus irrigation season, and the heat, groundwater scarcity issues. So it all comes to a head in the summer, but we'll just do it again next year.